The Democracy Institute is a think tank based in Washington, D.C. and London. It's committed to preparing next generation student scholars in the art of thinking on global, transdisciplinary scale.
The average American thinks that Saudi Arabia is a more progressive society than it was, and they're particularly interested and encouraged by the fact that Saudi Arabia wants to be more global facing economically.
Patrick Basham is the Institute's founding director. Thank you very much for your time. Can we just drill down into a bit of granular? What do you actually do?
We're a think tank. Our enemies say we do more tanking than thinking, but the notion is that we help educate the public, broadly defined, policymakers and journalists, on a whole host of issues. We do a lot of foreign policy, democratization. We also do a lot on elections, both in the United States and the United Kingdom, but also more broadly around the world, always trying to find out what do various publics in various marketplaces think about what's going on.
We will talk about elections in detail because it's very apposite at the moment. What sort of conversations do you want people to be having on the ground?
Want people to be asking ordinary people, not just the elites, ordinary people, what are their priorities? What matters in their daily lives? And do they see the future as a positive thing or a negative thing? Because the answers to those questions should tell policymakers how they, at very least, communicate their messages, but perhaps actually compose those messages in the first place, as in compose the substance behind those messages.
And have you found in the last few years that the subjects that people are talking about have changed quite a lot?
They have. I mean, both in Western Europe and in North America, for good or for ill, there's far more interest and concern about the issue of immigration, both legal and illegal. It's always been a under the radar issue. It's no longer beneath the surface. It's one that most people are talking about. And of course, in most recently, the economy, cost of living. That's the issue that's number one on most people's minds most of the time.
When we talk about immigration, it's probably impossible to define if that's chicken or egg, isn't it? What has caused the conversation in immigration so much? Is it generally on the ground, or is it because of what they've been fed and they've read that they feel that's the case?
I think it's a combination of the two, but it's principally ratcheted up because the average person is having a harder time making do. They are convinced that immigration, both legal and illegal, is literally costing them something, whether it's a job, whether it's healthcare opportunities, options, so housing options. So long as the average person feels that that's the calculus, then policymakers are going to have a hard time trying to sell successfully that immigration is a net plus.
A lot of people here are selling something. They're selling investment, they're selling their wares or whatever. What are you hoping to achieve by being here?
Well, I'm here partially to learn, but I'm also here to talk about things that we're interested in, work that we're doing. We released this week a study of American public opinion on Saudi Arabia and the changes that have happened here. So it's in a sense, we are meeting the two worlds in this one location.
And what does that say? What has your research found about what the average American says about Saudi Arabia?
The average American has quite a different opinion of Saudi Arabia than Americans' leadership does, whether left or right, who are both, for different reasons, continue to be quite negative on Saudi Arabia. The changes that have occurred over the past several years, while incomplete, have actually transmitted to the average American, which may be surprising. And the average American thinks that Saudi Arabia is a more progressive society than it was, and they're particularly interested and encouraged by the fact that Saudi Arabia wants to be more global facing economically, wants more trade relations, wants more investment from North America and Western Europe, and wants to be more of a participant in those economies. This is actually translating to ordinary people for a whole host of reasons, but I think most importantly, because the average person is looking for good news economically, and they see a successful Saudi Arabia, again, looking towards more participation externally, globally, as a potential instrument to actually improve their own lives.
Yeah. So it's an opportunity maybe they're realizing this is a place that wants and is seeking investment.
Absolutely. Saudi Arabia is a positive story. It's a confident story. It's a risk-taking story. And that is sadly unusual today. Increasingly, governments, countries, and societies are more inward-looking, they're more insecure, they're more risk-averse. Saudi Arabia has taken a different approach. I think from the evidence, so far it's working. And importantly, in terms of the optics for Saudi Arabia, globally, that message is getting across.
How does the average American reflect upon the fact that Saudi Arabia is actually a very young society, when a lot, certainly Western Europe and America, are increasingly older societies?
Well, that's one of the things that the ordinary person is understanding in a way that I think their leadership isn't. The leadership still sees Saudi Arabia as run by old men with very old-fashioned ideas, to put it politely. The average American, I think, because the average American is younger than the average American leader, recognizes or appreciates that there's an energy and a vitality coming out of Saudi Arabia and some of the neighboring countries, that at times Americans, for example, feel their country is lacking. It used to be part of the American character. And these days, whether it's just resting or dormant, or whether it's been killed off as some fear, it's something that Americans recognize and would like to see their country emulate again.
Patrick, we're talking about American leaders, and with what is going on with the world at the moment, as to whether people can believe polls. Do they feel there is so much misinformation out there? What do you feel about the polls currently and the veracity of them?
Many of the polls, not just in America, but many of the polls this election season, as in previous ones, are simply not well constructed. And as importantly, the most important results are hidden, and the sort of the sexy or the convenient narrative, convenient headline is what's trumpeted, particularly in the media polls and some of the academic polls. That is why, if you can have access, as most people don't, to the private polls that the campaigns are doing, they're the best polls because they have to be correct, because livelihoods and the futures of both candidates rest upon those results.
Why would the media polls not be well conducted? What would be the point of them not being well conducted?
Well, your question is perfectly reasonable. The unreasonable answer is that as a pollster, I mean, we do media polls, so I'm saying this with a certain amount of behind the curtain. Most pollsters recognize that the media outlet who sponsors them has their own political preference, shall we say, and that the result is less important to the media sponsor than the fact that it furthers that political narrative, right? And until because though, for example, during a long campaign, as in America, it doesn't, in a sense, matter what your numbers are as a pollster, because no one's saying you're right or wrong, because there's no result. But that is why when it gets close to the end, as we are now, most of the polls get more accurate, the media polls, and they get closer to one another, because it becomes a reputational thing at the very end. But until the end, it's more about satisfying the person who signs your check.
So it's an inbuilt bias until the climax, effectively.
That's unfortunately the sad truth of it.
And finally, Patrick, in the meantime, you want people to carry on debating
Yes.
and talking and considering the really important topics that matter to us all globally.
The most important thing is that we keep talking to each other rather than over each other, or stop yelling at each other, actually, and listening as much as we talk, right? That's the key thing. Is if we can agree to debate, but not do it in a disagreeable way. It sounds really old-fashioned, really old school, but my God, it makes such a difference.
Patrick, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure, thank you.